Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and this is Redlines. My guest today is Bashar Barazi. He's a Syrian journalist, a correspondent for HispanTV in Damascus, and a friend of the Grayzone. Welcome back to Redlines, Bashar.
Hi Anya, how are you?
Great, I'm happy to be speaking with you.
Thank you.
I wanted to start, if you could begin, by giving us a picture of the economic situation in Syria today. The so-called Cesar sanctions targeting Syria went into effect in June. What has been the impact on the average Syrian?
Well, as you know, the sanctions against Syria is not something new. Syria, since 1979, is a scenario of a series of sanctions imposed by the United States because of its policy. But with the beginning of the crisis, the United States, with Europe and other countries, imposed big sanctions against Syria under different titles as the Law of Responsibility of Syria. But the last one was Cesar Law, which has started in June of this year. As you know, we cannot negate, we cannot ignore that this law has affected Syria seriously, especially with the pandemic of coronavirus. As you know, the pandemic started in all over the world, and that law has caused a serious problem with the Syrian government to get or to have access to medical necessity of the Syrian citizens. And this is because we can see that in Syria the mortality numbers is higher than another countries, neighbor countries in the region, because the difficulties that the government is facing to get access to the necessity of the medical necessity for the Syrian citizens. Also, we can find that this law was an obstacle to the reconstruction process in Syria because, as you know, the American administration threat all companies and all inversions that they are or have showed interest to turn back to the Syrian market. Because of that, we can see that that has delayed big time the reconstruction process in Syria. And there's some lack of necessities of the basic necessity of the Syrian citizens in the market. But finally, we can say, as you know, say that the sanctions, the target of the sanctions are the citizen, the same citizen, not the government. And this is not in Syria, in all over the world. The sanctions are always a weapon against the people, not the government. The sanctions cannot change government, as the United States proclaimed that they want to change the Syrian regime. But as you know, the Syrian people was the victim of this sanction, not the government.
And how has the government responded to these measures?
Well, as you know, the Syrian government has a big experience for more than 40 years in facing sanctions, different kinds of sanctions. Therefore, we can say, we can see that the Syrian government made an alliance with countries like Russia, Iran, China, sometimes India. They have a good relationship with all these countries, and they can get and have the necessities of the Syrian people and Syrian citizens in different fields. Sorry. Therefore, we can see that the Syrian government has the capacities to overcome the impact of these sanctions, and it has relations with so many countries, so they didn't depend to the United States. But the most important thing that we have to remember is what the President Bashar al-Assad, said in the last speech with this new government that was formed a month ago. Al-Assad stressed in the importance to develop or to work and to have the priority of the agricultural sector to get the self-independence and not to depend to another country, especially in this sector that helps to satisfy the necessities of the basic necessity of the Syrian citizen and the Syrian people. Syria are working in the industrial alimentic production and in the agricultural sector to get or to guarantee the necessities, the basic necessities of the Syrian citizen. In Syria, we have a lot of crops, a lot of good agricultural production that will help Syria, as it helped Syria before, to overcome the impact of the sanctions.
You recently filed a report stating that the new phase of U.S. occupation in Syria has begun, particularly in northeastern Syria. What are the latest developments?
Yes, we can see that the United States has started really a big or a new phase in its occupation of the northeast of Syria after its withdrawal or its gradual withdrawal from Iraq. A large convoys of military installation of the United States across the border with Iraq towards Hasaka, Deir ez-Zor, and toward the oil fields in Syria, where the United States has a big base, and we have seen a large number of American soldiers getting or reaching or arriving to this base. You can say that the objective of this, the myth of this mobilization of the United States is create a new base in Syria, the formation of the so-called democratic force of Syria, which are constituted from Kurdish troops, and to get a new Saudi soldier to this region, which is rich in its oil reserves, to bring new soldier of Saudi Arabia and other country for a possible withdrawal of the United States soldiers from the northeast of Syria. We can see that a new phase has started here with the new steps of the American administration before the presidential election in the United States, and this new step or this new phase in the United States presence of Syria in Syria is because of the withdrawal of some bases in Iraq, and because also of the next presidential elections in the United States. The administration of Trump are looking for a new experience in Syria with this phase, with sending a new troops, new American troops, new military troops to this region, which is rich in this petrol, in oil, and in gas.
Well, you may have just answered my next question, which is why is this region of Syria so important? Is it as simple as the natural resources are there and the United States would like to have its hands on it?
Yes, apparently this is one of the most important reasons, but we can also refer to the strategic position of this zone, which is in the triangle between Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. The northeast of Syria is most important strategic. It has a very important strategic position in this area because it's a connection between Iraq, Turkey, and also between Syria, Iraq, Iran. And this is very important to refer because it has a big significant strategically depending to the important relation between Syria, Iran. This is line which started in Iran, passing from Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. It should pass from the northeast of Syria, and this important region also has important reserve of crops, strategic crops like wheat, cotton, and other necessities of the Syrian citizens, especially in this era where sanctions are imposed against Syrian citizens, and there's difficulties to get access to many products. And this region is very important because of its position and its crops and the oil reserve, the natural resource in this part.
What has Turkey's role been in northeastern Syria, and how are average Syrians responding to Turkish escalations and U.S. escalations, I should say?
Well, as we all know, Turkey has a very negative role in Syria. Not in this time. Since the beginning of the crisis, Turkey became that bridge which brought a terrorist group, which brought armed to kill Syrian people, and which are occupying a part of the Syrian territory in the northwest and in the northeast. In the northwest, you all know that Turkey, according to its groups, terrorist groups, and the moderate groups that support, has a presence in the northeast of Syria, northwest, sorry, of Syria. There's more than 40 points in the northwestern Syria, in Idlib province, and also in the northeast of Syria. Turkey has started last summer an operation to create a safe zone in this part of Syria, but this is not the objective. The main purpose of this operation is getting the Kurdish and the original inhabitant of this region out of the safe zone, which is about 35 kilometers in the Syrian and Turkish borders. Turkey is trying to make a demographic change in this zone by bringing or inhabiting groups loyal to Ankara and other groups, terrorist group, which has supported during the crisis, and to get out to force the original inhabitant of this zone to get out of this part of Syria. For that purpose, they cut drinking water, they cut electricity, they have consecutive attacks by the Turkish army and this terrorist group to force the citizens, the Syrian citizens, to get out of this part of Syria and to make a demographic change in this region in a violation of international law and with the Charter of the United Nations. Sorry, I forgot to mention about the reaction of the Syrian citizen in this part. There's a lot of manifestation. There's a lot of protests that started in this zone against the Turkish presence and the United States occupation to the northeast of Syria. We have started the last 2 months to see the beginning of popular resistance in Syria. Citizens from the northeast of Syria and from Deir ez-Zor, from Hasaka, from Raqqa, different 3 provinces in Syria that have suffered from the presence of the United States and Turkey, has started in a systematic operation against their presence with the attacks against the Kurdish force, the so-called democratic force of Syria, and with some attacks against United States convoys and Turkish convoys that entered illegitimately to the Syrian territory.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov recently visited Syria, meeting with his counterpart and with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. What was the purpose of this trip and why is it happening now?
Well, we cannot exaggerate. We are not exaggerating by saying that it is the most important visit of a delegation to Syria since more than 3 or 4 years. The Russian delegations with Sergey Lavrov, with Borisov, the vice prime minister of Russia, arrived to Syria in with a big delegation in different aspects, economic, political, and also military aspects to talk about the cooperation with the Syrian government. They met with President al-Assad, they met with al-Muallim, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and there was more than 40 projects in the reconstruction of Syria in different aspects: energy, agricultural, industrial, and many other fields in Syria. We can say that we can consider that this visit is to overcome the impact of the sanction imposed by Syria and to help the Syrian people in getting or in overcoming the sanctions. The Russians promised to give a very different kind of project in Syria to help the Syrian people in the economic aspect, in the reconstruction area. And I think that there was a military aspect of the cooperation in this visit, but it was not declared by the media. We can say that in the next few days we can find the result of the military results of the visit by the beginning of an operation in the northwest of Syria in Idlib against the terrorist armed group and the terrorist group supported by Turkey. The Syrian forces are preparing for the Battle of Idlib to recover part of the south of Idlib after the violation of Turkey and the groups supported by Turkey to all their compromise, to all their agreements. So in the next few days, we can see a new military operation in Idlib, northwest of Syria, to liberate this part of the Syrian territory.
How has the relationship between Syria and Russia changed as a result of this war?
Yes, we can. First of all, the relation between Syria and Russia is not are not new. They come back to the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union, they can talk about a strategic relation between two countries. Russia and Syria has cooperation in many aspects and many fields, and this visit is an expression of this cooperation between Syria and Russia. But with the beginning of the crisis, we can show how Russia helped Syria first in the political aspect in the Security Council by the vetoes of Russia and China, and then with helping Syria in the operation against terrorist group in all Syrian territory. Russia has a big role in Syria to help Syria to recover the normality in the country and to get out the terrorist group. And at the same time, I think that the Russian role in Syria helped Russia to recover its position as a power in this world. By Syria, by the gate of Syria, Russia has recovered its role as an international power, as a strong power in the Security Council and in the military aspect, with the biggest or the important achieved in the military aspect in Syria with the war against terrorist group. I think that this benefits for us for both countries, Syria and Russia, are good. There's a good alliance between this country, and they are achieving and they are getting more and more in the strategic relation between Syria and Russia.
Finally, Bashar, I wanted to end by asking a broader question about the region. As you know, several Gulf states, including Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, recently signed normalization agreements with Israel. How are Syrian people responding to this news, and how much do you believe the war on your country had to do with Israel and how Syria relates to the region?
Well, I think that the Syrian people and all Arab people refuse this agreement with Israel because they consider that Israel as an occupation, is a country that occupied parts of the Syrian and the Arab territory in Palestine, the Syrian Golan, and other countries, other part of the countries as Jordan. So the Syrian people, with all Arab countries, people also refuse this agreement, this normalization agreements, and they consider that some Arab countries like Bahrain, Emirates are doing a favor to Trump before the presidential election, and this kind of service that they are doing to help the agenda of Trump in the election, and this will not bring peace to this country because this is not the way to do it. I think that there's so many other ways and other gates to reach peace or to achieve the peace in this region, not by this kind of agreement that are imposed for the Trump administration before the elections. It's agreement from one part, not two parts. The United States imposed the condition of all this agreement normalization, and it's just helping Israel to have more power in this region. It's not an equitable agreement. There's no mutual benefits for both countries, just like Bahrain and Israel. So not just Syrian people, but all Arab people refuse this agreement and consider that it's a part of the United States agenda before the presidential election of Trump.
And how Israel relates to the war on Syria?
Well, Syria is. I think that we are in a war with Israel because Israel doesn't stop to attack Syria since 2012 till this moment. Israel is attacking Syria and attacking a position of the Syrian army. So the peace in this region is not very proximate. I think that there's a possibility to have a war, to start a war in this region. The agreement, the normalization agreement, has nothing to be with Syria, and I think that Israel has to change their policies and has to stop attacking Syria just to reach the peace in this region.
Bashar Barazi, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much.